There was a Matt Walsh clip talking about being afraid of like trans men entering a bathroom and like talking to him, and it highlights a really interesting contradiction in his worldview that I want to dive into.
As more women identify as men, our bathrooms will become filled with people who see the bathroom as a social occasion.
Okay, so first off, the thing that he's afraid of is people like talking to him in a bathroom. Now, it is actually true that women talk to each other in bathrooms and men don't. This is something that every trans person learns through experience. Like once they start using a bathroom, once they socially transition, this kind of stuff. Yeah, women talk all the time in bathrooms about the most random things. Say like, pass me a tampon or something. Like, tons of conversation happening in the women's bathroom. Men are completely silent. Now, in Matt Walsh's worldview, he has to somehow pretend that, like, all trans people are not going to know this, or that they're going to be, like, biologically hardwired to behave as their assigned gender at birth. Like, that there's something within trans men's biology that make them talk in bathrooms, and something in trans women's biology that make them not talk in bathrooms. But this is precisely an example which illustrates the social construction of gender, that these are social norms and standards which we learn through practice and imitation. Like, the reason why men don't talk to each other in bathrooms is because they don't see men talking to each other in bathrooms. And a trans man entering an unknown environment is going to observe this exact same trend, and through the re-socialization of his transition, adopt that new practice. Like that's how gender actually works in practice.
Next thing you know, you're going to be at the urinal and some post-op, quote, trans man is going to slide up in right next to you, and which will be the first problem, because all men know that you never, ever use the urinal right next to another guy unless there's no other available.
Trans men know this too. Trans men also observe the pattern and learn the bro code. That's how cis men do it. They learned this growing up from observing other men. Trans men learned this too.
Which is man code. But women don't know about man code because they're not men. And then to make matters worse, she's going to try to strike up a conversation like, hey there, fellow dude, what do you think of the tile in this bathroom? It feels a little outdated to me.
Literally the only way you can believe what Matt Walsh is saying here is if you believe that the man code of don't pee in the urinal right next to someone and don't talk to other men in the bathroom is biologically hardwired into people based off of, like, the chromosomes or genitals that they had when they were born. Also, like, most trans men in the men's bathroom go and use their own stall because it's a lot harder to stand up to pee when you were born with a pussy. That is an unfortunate fact about the world. Trans men have to work a lot harder to enjoy the experience of peeing on a tree. It is it is known. They actually, interestingly enough, I found they make these, like, if you know about packers, they're like essentially like basically little fake penises that some trans men put in their pants to like have a bulge. They make packers that you can pee through. They're called stand-up pee packers, and some trans men use them to like use urinals, which is fascinating.
I don't know if that's the kind of thing women talk about in their bathrooms, but I know that it's not the kind of thing we talk about in ours, because we don't talk about anything. It's interesting to observe this dynamic, actually, because when men identify as women, they turn womanhood into an absurd caricature. A man's version of womanhood is excessive, grotesque. A man will appropriate femininity by obnoxiously exaggerating it.
As if cis women don't do that either. Like, the idea that there are no cis women who obnoxiously exaggerate femininity to the degree that Matt Walsh is talking about is crazy. The anime community, a lot of women in the anime community do the exact same thing that, like, Matt Walsh and other conservatives complain about, like, trans girls doing. And also that completely ignores, like, trans girls who are not, like, excessively hyper-feminine. There are so many trans girls who are, like, tomboys or gender nonconforming or not the stereotype which you're imagining. Like, he's getting mad at one stereotype and assuming that it is every single trans woman. Also, like, the idea that performing, like, a certain gender or, like, expressing your gender in a certain way is appropriation is just weird, because, like, a lot of these things are entirely arbitrary. Like, the idea that boys should like blue and wear suits, or girls should like pink and wear dresses. Like, for something that arbitrary, just let people do what they want. Like, to claim that as appropriation is... Also, since when have conservatives ever cared about appropriation? Okay, conservatives have never cared about appropriation of like cultures or race or literally anything unless it's something that they can weaponize against trans people. Like, has there ever been another context where conservatives have like claimed or complained about something being appropriation? Because I have never heard conservatives do that before. It shows how like their arguments are entirely bad faith and based off of premises that they don't believe, but just because they sound like convincing or scary or like a bad problematic thing. It's like the Nosbol thing of weaponizing woke ideology to support like fascist goals. Matt Walsh absolutely does this, where you'll see people that say things that like, oh, it's the rich and powerful that are like ruling the world and harming us all and like taking us over, but like by the rich and the powerful, they just mean Jewish people, and it's like a dog whistle for Jewish people. Matt Walsh is doing the same thing with like the appropriation argument here.
The best example of this is the drag queen, of course, a ludicrous parody of womanhood, a masquerade.
And also, drag queens are not trans women. Like drag queens are men who identify as men who are explicitly exaggerating femininity in that way.
Now, on the other hand, as we're beginning to see, when women identify as men, rather than exaggerating masculinity, they instead attempt to feminize it.
Okay, this notion that trans men are trying to feminize masculinity, where is this coming from? Because like, have you seen like trans dudes? Like, if we just go to Google Images right here, like show me some trans dudes, and like this does not look like people trying to feminize masculinity. Like, these are just men coming in all shapes and sizes. This is the trans man who's like a professional boxer. That's not feminizing masculinity. I mean, we see a whole wide variety of some men over here, ranging from more feminine to more masculine. But like, this narrative is just so not true. Like, yeah, try to pretend that this guy is feminizing masculinity. How is that happening?
The woman doesn't want to turn into a man so much as she wants to turn men into her.
That is not what being a trans man is. How can anyone like hear about the existence of trans men and think that trans men actually don't want to transition into men? They just want to transition all the men into women. That's what trans men are, is people trying to transition men into women.
The man becomes a funhouse mirror version of femininity. The woman wants masculinity to become a funhouse mirror version of herself. And this partly reflects the fact that men and women embrace trans ideology for entirely different reasons.
Source? Like, how is it true that trans men and trans women embrace trans identity for entirely different reasons? Like, both trans men and trans women were assigned a gender at birth that doesn't feel right for them, and they want to live their life as a different gender. It's that simple. Like, that's the same reason for both of them.
The transgenderism of women and the transgenderism of men, and we tend to think of these things as the same thing, but they're really not.
So like, yes, trans men and trans women are different, much in the same way that men and women are different, but they're still both trans, and there's so much shared experience with respect to being trans.
The man rejects his manhood because he fetishizes womanhood. The woman rejects her womanhood because she hates her body and herself, and she sees manhood as an escape.
So we have like a universal narrative here that all trans men... Wait, hold up. Didn't he just contradict himself? He's now saying that all trans men are trying to escape femininity, but the way that they're trying to escape femininity is by making men feminine? Because that's what he said they were doing earlier. He just completely flip-flopped on what he was saying. Like, this speech is so incoherent and internally contradictory in order to paint these narratives that are backed by no evidence, which are so universalizing in ways that just aren't true. Like, there are feminine trans men, there are masculine trans men, there are feminine trans women, there are masculine trans women. There is this broad spectrum of expression and identity which encompasses the human experience. And trying to paint broad narratives about, like, all trans women are fetishizing and sexualizing femininity just doesn't make sense when we know that there are asexual trans women that exist. Like, literally, women who experience no sexual attraction to anyone. So if being trans was a fetish, how could that exist? It can't exist under Matt Walsh's worldview. So he just has to paint narratives that are literally false and then contradict himself as soon as some kind of contradictory evidence pops up where he'll switch the narrative, he'll switch the story, he'll switch to something else. It is an entirely incoherent worldview, Like, this is why fascists, and especially the types like Matt Walsh, are so big on the anti-empiricism, the disbelief in anything which like scientific studies say, which is shown to be, you know, like proven in say like a medical study, for example. They deny evidence existing, but you'll also see them try to weaponize evidence if there is any way they can misconstrue it to like support what they're trying to say. Everything they do is two-faced because they don't actually have any position on anything other than say like their bigotry, their desire for a fascist authoritarian government, and they will take whatever means they can to try to justify essentially their end goals for power. Like there is not a coherent worldview there, and I think that this clip absolutely highlights that very well.